Had no choice.
Are you going to join us for davening?
I should.
To be determined?
Well, we have to see how it feels.
Uh-huh.
Having a little surgery.
Oh, I hope everything's okay.
I hope so. Yeah, we have a good-
Maybe.
not really certain, but it's a big part of the procedure.
Uh-huh. How are you, Stanley?
Good morning.
Good morning. We missed you yesterday.
You did?
I did, yeah.
You didn't see me?
I didn't see you.
You couldn't have. Because I weren't here.
He wasn't here, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's why we missed you.
I had planned to be here,
Uh-huh.
and I kept fussing around, and before I knew it was 10 after 11.
Oh, wow.
Tell me you didn't have 9.
We had 8. No, I'm kidding. We had a video.
That's my biggest fear.
Yeah, right?
Walk me on number 10. Like,
Mm. Yeah.
held up everybody.
Mm.
Lately, they've been
The whole train was derailed because of you.
not the first time.
Yeah.
Are we doing handouts?
This one, no, this one, I think you have it.
Okay, this goes from page 130 something.
Oh, so then take a different one. Morning. How are you? Good to see you.
98.
Perfect. All right. I guess we should close the door because these people are having a lively conversation. So we began this conversation about tests, right? About the experience of being tested by Hashem. The experience, which I think we can refer to a little more effectively as experiencing challenges, right? Having difficult things. He gives example of financial challenges or health challenges or familial challenges, right? All of these different challenges that I feel like it's like daylight savings time or something, and everybody's like off an hour. You know? It was sleepless last night. The Jewish midnight mass.
And my exciting time is in early November.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
was confused.
yeah. So we were talking about tests, right? And experiencing challenges and these different challenges as sort of being a real world application of this idea of concealment, right? Of divine concealment versus divine revelation. And to go back even further, just to remind ourselves on how we got into this conversation to begin with, we presented the verse, Vayada'ata yom v'ashavesel v'avecha, that you shall know today and you shall place it, you should impress it upon your heart, that Hashem hu Elikim, that God is God, that Adonai hu Elohim, right, is how we say that in the Torah or during prayers, that God in his infinite transcendent essence is Elohim, is the God that is present in heaven and earth. Is present, is the same God as that which we are able to conceive of. Meaning that we could say that one could maybe have a sort of a thought that there is like our conception of God that is fundamentally limited, and then there is some infinite being that is beyond our conception, and maybe they're two separate entities, right, or two separate realities. And this is coming to say Havayu Elikim, that God is God, and that there is, good morning, and that they're one and the same, right? Which means to say that in Kabbalistic language, we spoke about it as this element of revelation and this element of concealment, both in the ways that God relates to creation. Both of them are expressions of God's essence, right? Both Havaya, the expression of revelation, and Elikim, the expression of concealment, are work in tandem with each other. And at the same time, we have this tradition that they are opposite, they're opposed to one another. So we're navigating the relationship between the two of those. And that's how we got to this whole conversation of revealed and concealed, right? Everything that was involved in that very detailed conversation. And to apply that more practically, we started talking about tests and understanding that if concealment is not a true concealment, then what is the experience of a challenge, right? And a challenging moment in which we are faced with some sense of things aren't in control, or things are out of control, or something's not going right, or there was a plan and it's not being stuck to, right? All of those experiences are part of this test idea that are born out of the concealment, right? There, as we mentioned last week in the Mimer, if you knew what the plan was, it wouldn't be so difficult, right? If you knew you had to get a flat tire, you wouldn't be so upset about it, right? It's just sort of part of the experience. It's what we have to do today. So that's where we're holding. We are on page 198 in the papers, and they make a very interesting point in this gray box, which is that the language of altira, or something to that effect, which means do not fear, is mentioned more than 110 times in the Torah, and that the corollary, or maybe the contrast to recognizing that a concealment is not a concealment, and that a challenging experience is just an opportunity for growth, is to inculcate within ourselves this knowledge of this consciousness of eradicating fear from our experience. And that the more we're able to eradicate fear, that means, like in the language of AA, they say, let go and let God, right? That the more we're able to free ourselves from thinking that we know what the plan is, and allow ourselves to just trust that God has our best interests in mind, and that his plan is singular and positive. When we give ourselves over to that, when we integrate that into our consciousness, so then we free ourselves from fear, we free ourselves from anxiety, right? So that's that. So the Torah telling us over and over again, different languages of altira, of do not fear, echoes that same idea. So let's see what he says. I think we ended off with this paragraph on 198. So the experience of a challenge, of confronting a challenge, of being placed in a situation in which we find ourselves uncertain about the outcome, uncertain about what's going on. Good morning. Challenged to see the bigger picture, feeling maybe anxious or afraid, or any of these experiences. This all allows us, it facilitates that ultimately what we come to is pnimis va'atzmius shem havaya, the inner essential infinite name of Havaya, meaning that naturally we are programmed, our natural experience leaves us or gives us a limited relationship with God, because we're limited beings, right? And we're programmed in a limited way. And our baseline, our natural state is oriented towards the physical, right? We're physical beings in a physical body, in a physical world. And so because of that, we relate to God only so much, if at all, as a baseline. The experience of enduring and navigating a challenge, something like a test like this, like we said about the patriarch Abraham when he was in the furnace, when he was put in the furnace, right, is that when enduring the challenge facilitates a deeper relationship with God, or orients us towards God as being the orchestrator of the challenging moment and having a bigger plan in place, we emerge from that with a deeper relationship with God. We emerge from that with no longer having a limited conception of God, but challenging the limitations of that conception to have a more expanded perception of God's essence. We're able to perceive God in a more infinite way than we are maybe naturally programmed to, in which we perceive him more finite, more limited, right? Because our natural orientation is physical, so we can only conceive of so much living in a physical world. When we challenge the limitations of the physical world and we realize that fire should burn and being thrown into a furnace should burn a person, but nevertheless, God put me here and he has a plan and the fire didn't burn him, right? And he emerged out the other side, Abraham. So because of that, his relationship with God was that much more significant, was that much richer and more robust. Right? And this is true that through the test that Abraham endured, he was able to realize and conceive, he was able to come to a place to have a relationship with God in an infinite, unlimited form. The same is true of each one of us, right? It doesn't have to be Abraham in the furnace. It can be losing our wallet, right? It can be a difficult experience in our own microcosm way, right? It can be a flat tire. For each one of us, when we're faced with a challenge that requires us to dig deep and to go beyond our natural programming, our natural wiring, and to find some divinity in that experience. So it totally challenges our preconceived notions of God, and it allows us to have a relationship with a much more infinite God, right? A much more unlimited God. And these are specifically anything that gets in the way of us having a deeper relationship with God, right? That there are challenges that we face that tell us, don't invest in learning, don't give tzedakah, don't do a mitzvah, right? We question its efficacy, we question its power, right? We get ourselves caught up in our thinking instead of our doing. There's a tradition that we, right after we finish Yom Kippur, so we daven the regular, right when the Eilah is over, which is the last service of Yom Kippur. So then right after that is Ma'ariv, which is the regular evening service that we say during the week every day. And in that, one of the blessings that we say is Slach Lanu, is pardon us or forgive us, right? Which is peculiar to say after we come out of Yom Kippur. But one of the ideas is that what if there was no time for us to do anything that we need forgiving, right? But one of the ideas is that we didn't believe fully in the capacity of Yom Kippur. We didn't give ourselves over to believe fully in what Yom Kippur could do. And so we had a little bit of us that was like maybe unsure if it worked entirely. And that's what we have to then ask forgiveness for. Meaning to say that anything can get in our way, any sense of self can get in our way, and certainly things that come from outside of us that we perceive as tests or challenges can get in the way of us having a more robust relationship with God. And we can either just endure it, right? We can get a flat tire and we can call AAA, or we can roll up our sleeves and change the tire, or we can realize that this is a divine experience, right? That's really where it changes, where the experience is developed. Top of page 199. And to stand in the face of a challenge, to stand in the face of a difficult moment, is to say that this isn't going to separate me from God, right? I'm not going to let this get the better of me, that I start to think that maybe there's no plan here, right? That I start to think that things are out of control. And rather, we take this opportunity to invest in learning, to invest in our relationship with God, each one of us, according to our ability. And this allows us to embrace our nature, which is, good morning, to embrace our nature, which is to transcend the natural order, right? To transcend our own natural limitations, right? That what it means to be a Jewish person is to not be limited by the natural order, to not be limited by what nature dictates as the boundaries of existence, right, or the boundaries of functioning, and rather to know that our essence, our core, is divine, is godly, and that means that we're not bound by this natural order. We're not bound by those natural limitations, right? The world tells us that it's all survival of the fittest, that the only governing body is evolution, right? But we reject that. We say that we are not just born out of it's not just an unfolding of previous generations permutating into the next, but rather each one of us has an individual divine core that tethers us to God's essence. And so tapping into that is tapping into the ability to transcend limitations. And this is, in fact, the whole reason why the soul came down. The whole reason why we exist in a physical form with a spiritual core is for this marriage, right? For the soul to be in a body, for us to realize that our body is not the essence of our existence, is not the be all and end all of our existence. And in fact, our primary existence is our soul. And to shift that perspective allows us to transcend the limitations of the body and of the natural world. Right, that the soul comes down into a body that's in a world, and all of it is limited and all of it is finite. Everything has its own finitude, its own limitations that it's bumping up against, right? Like we said, that in this world, water is cold and fire is hot, right? In this world, oil burns, oil is combustible, and vinegar is not, right? But we can through the work, through the reflection and the Vayada'ata, right? The hard, laborious, repetitive work that is transcending our physical limitation and identifying with our soul. To get to that place, we can live in a world where vinegar is just as combustible as oil, right? We can live in a world where fire isn't hot and water isn't cold, or at least that's not the be all and end all of our experience. That we live in a physical world that tells us, that presents to us that we have to operate a certain way, right? That it tells us that there are certain conventions that have to be followed. Right? Like a person who owns a business, that logic would dictate to him that he has to spend every moment he has working in his business. And if he takes off time to learn or to pray or to do a mitzvah, any time that he takes off to do something that's not business related, logic would dictate, the logic of this physical world would dictate that means he's losing money at that time, right? That unless, if you're not investing in your business, you're losing money, right? Time is money. Right, that's what the limitations of this physical world would tell us. And it goes even further. We're in the third paragraph on 199. That in fact, most people have an experience, or at least it is a thing that is well documented, that many people who constrain themselves to the limitations of the physical thinking, of the physical logic, would say that a person has to do some shady stuff. He has to employ certain schemes and tactics in order to get ahead, right? And that always is, that sometimes negates going in the path of truth, right? It sometimes requires a little obfuscation, a little suspension of the truth, if not something more dubious or nefarious. Yes.
I don't think there are any or many 199s on the table.
Oh, no, really?
Does anybody have one? Yeah. Well, I want to take yours.
You can take mine.
You have one? Andy?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just me.
No, me too. We have not.
Go ahead.
Oh, really?
That one for her.
So,
I could print off some more copies.
well, probably.
You want to share? You're just gonna share? Okay.
Sure.
All right, I'll have them for next week then. We'll have them for 57.84.
Just me.
It's like the old days.
Yeah,
Only one person has a book.
yeah. So oftentimes, right, we think about whatever, there's in recent memory, there are plenty of stories in the news of, white collar crimes of people doing shady stuff in order to get ahead, right? Right, there's all sorts of dishonest business practices that we see going on, right? Because that's what the physical world, that's the limitations of the physical world. That's what it tells us. That's what it gets us to think that that's really how you get ahead in life. That a person tells himself, or the world tells a person, that if he operates his business, if he conducts his business honestly, then he's not going to make a profit, or he could even lose, right? At best, he'll break even, and probably the opposite. Because the majority, because the rules, so to speak, of the world, the principles of the world seem to oppose it. But the truth of the matter is that that's not true. The fact of the matter is that the truth of the world, because the physical world in its concealment, the concealment is part of the divine expression, right? It's not something that opposes divinity. It's not something that opposes God, but it's rather part of God's expression. So that means the concealment is also divine, right? That's Elohim works with Havaya. They're both expressions of the same truth. So that means that the concealment of this world, what is hidden, the fact that the world seems to operate according to principles of its own nature, right? That there are principles of survival of the fittest, of dog eat dog, of evolution, of all these things. There's truth to all of them, and they don't negate God's truth, right? Which means to say that when a person owns a business and he also invests in giving tzedakah, or he also invests in taking time off to learn, or taking time to pray, and he conducts his business properly, God makes sure that business is successful. Because the truth of the essence of God's essence can't be concealed. So even though it is concealed that we live in a physical world where we have to work to make money, and even though it seems like the people who are cheating get ahead, the fact of the matter is that when we operate upright and we operate morally and ethically, and we take time to invest in our Judaism and incorporate that into our business, into our financial life, right, into our professional life, all of that enriches and is enriched by God and is blessed by God. And in fact, this is the entire purpose for creation, right? The purpose of creation is not to sit on a mountaintop and meditate on God. The purpose of creation is to have a business that we operate according to Torah, that gives tzedakah, that takes off for Shabbos, right? This is the ultimate intent. This is what God planned. This is what God wanted for creation. That even though we have a business and it presents all sorts of challenges and it presents all sorts of difficulties in running it morally and ethically and running it upright and above board, nevertheless, we run that business and we take time to invest in our Judaism every day. Each person according to the schedule that he sets out for himself. And from anything that even looks like falsehood, we stay away from. And we stay away from any type of schemes or any type of how do they translate that? Craftiness, right? Rather, we go earnestly and sincerely and in the path of truth. And we have no semblance of anything that could be construed as shady or improper in the way we do our business dealings, right? Continuing on page 200. Right, so through this, which is a very practical application of what we're talking about, each one of us can relate to this in our own way. So is in fact through our religious experiences, or rather, if we say it, our relationship with God is not born in the synagogue, it is born in how we live our life, right? It's not born on Shabbos through davening as much as it's born every day when we're in the office. That is it's more ripe for us to realize God in those experiences in some way than it is when we're in synagogue. Because that's truly where we're able to challenge our status quo, the status quo of our perception, the limitations of our perception, our preconceived notions, and to expand our consciousness to perceive a God that is truly unlimited. And is in fact a demonstrable, is that a word? Demonstrable? Yeah. Demonstrable experience, right? That we're able to actually be present to conducting ourselves morally and ethically and above board and to challenge the status quo of this world. And we're able to see that God is taking care of us, right? It's not like some far off, like woo la la type of thing, right? It is, we see our bottom line, right? It's either black or it's red, right? And we see that when we invest ourselves in not trying to get ahead, not trying to cheat the system or scam the system, but rather to do things the way God expects us to do us, the way God wants us to do it, that when we do it like that, we see that God takes care of us. That even though the way the world presents it, it doesn't make any sense, even though the limitations of this physical world will tell us that you have to cheat or you have to scam or you have to become a workaholic, right? And you can't take a moment off, you can't take a day off. Right? We say take one day off a week, right? We say take time every day to daven, to learn, to give tzedakah, right? We challenge what the world says, and God takes care of us, right? And the proof is in the pudding, right? And each one of us can see this for ourselves, right? You don't have to take the rabbi's word for it, right? And in fact, not only does a person not lose out for doing the right thing, but in fact, it allows him an opportunity to feel godliness, to feel his soul in a more sincere and a more full way. And what we orient ourselves towards is, instead of living in a finite world in which you put in X amount of hours and you make X amount of money, or you do X, Y, and Z, and the result is ABC in this very like consequential cause and effect type of world, we orient ourselves, we attain for ourselves a reality in which we put in X and what comes out is totally disconnected, because what comes out is what God wants. That it's not anymore merely causal. And really, the place where we invest ourselves is not in the limitations of this world, meaning not in trying to get ahead by scamming the system, but where our investment is in our relationship with God. And that the more we take care of that relationship, the more everything in our life is taken care of. The author of this discourse, the Rebbe Rashab, there's a story, I think it's with Rebbe Rashab, it's with one of their bands. He had a chassid, he had a person in his community who made like rubber boots, galoshes, like for the snow, for the rain. And he came to ask the Rebbe for advice and to ask his opinion on how to run the business more effectively, more successfully, how it can be a conduit for God's blessing. And when he came in, the Rebbe Rashab wanted to know, how was he learning? How was he davening, right? How was he taking care of his relationship with God? How was he taking care of that personal element of his relationship with God? Where was he investing in that? And all he wanted to do was talk about his business. And the Rebbe, and so the Rebbe remarked something to the effect of, I know you put feet in galoshes, but I've never seen a head in galoshes. Right? That he was so consumed with the business that he didn't, his entire existence was put into those shoes. We say that the way we relate to those physical, to those material elements of our existence is much more, is like at arm's reach relative to what we hold dear, most dear, which is our relationship with God. That is where our true passion lies, and that is where our true investment is. And the fact of the matter is that we need a vessel for God to take care of us. We need a conduit for the blessing in order that we can live successfully and function effectively, to continue to develop and nurture this relationship, right? Which I think is in a lot of ways in tune with what Rabbi Taub said when he came here a couple of weeks ago, in the sort of the conflict about how do I daven for things that I need when it seems to be ego oriented or ego driven. And that ultimately, in some sense, we're asking God to take care of our physical things in order that it frees us up to be able and primed to invest in our relationship with God instead. When I was in yeshiva, there was a little corner store at the end of the block, and it was open like random hours. And it was because the guy it was like never consistent, and it would close like in the middle of the day. And the guy had figured out exactly how much money he had to make every day to sustain himself. And as soon as he hit that number, he closed and he went to the study hall and he learned for the rest of the day. He had to make like 75 shekel, for that day to like take care of his bottom line. And as soon as he hit that number, he closed up shop and he went to go learn every day. So it was just like, you're gonna catch him or you're not. It was like, what? Like only in Israel stuff like that happens. But that's like a very concrete expression of what we're talking about here, right? He's like, I need this vessel. God gave me this conduit to in order that I can sustain myself. What am I trying to franchise my corner store? Like I'm trying to learn Torah here, So I'll make my 75 shekel, whatever it is, and then I'll go do my thing. So that's challenging our preconceived notions, right? That's challenging the status quo. And this allows us to ascend again and again to further enrich our relationship with God and our perspective and our perception of God's presence in our life. Page 201. And this speaks to the entire experience of why there is such a thing as a challenge, why the Torah tells us that God will challenge us, that God will test us. Now, that God challenges you, that the whole purpose of these challenges is that we can come to a deeper, a richer, a totally new level in our relationship with God, right? To totally challenge our natural perception and to have a supernatural relationship and a supernatural sensitivity to God's presence in our life. And just like Abraham was challenged, right? And we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah, in which the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah is the Akedah, right? Is the binding of Isaac. That is the Rosh Hashanah commemorates that, among other things, right? Rosh Hashanah is also the birthday of mankind, right? Adam and Eve were created on Rosh Hashanah, but so too was the Akedah experience, was the binding of Isaac, which is the 10th of the 10 challenges, the 10 tests that Abraham was tested with. And we recall this every year. And in fact, we recall the binding of Isaac every day as part of the morning prayers, because every day we reflect on the nature of challenges and recognizing that this is a function of human existence, of what it means to be a Jew in this world. At the same time, we say in davening every day, that we ask God to spare us from challenges because it is a difficult experience, because it is hard to navigate. So we ask God to spare us, but in as much as we are asked to be spared, we also recognize that it is something that can be a regular day-to-day regular day-to-day function. So just like Abraham was challenged in his own way, so too each one of us is challenged in our own way. And just like he was able to draw down into his deep reserves and to overcome each one of those challenges, so too we share that same spiritual DNA, right? Spiritual and physical DNA, right? We're all descendants of Abraham. And so as such, we have those same reserves, we're able to tap into that same place to navigate whatever and to overcome whatever is challenging us in our own personal lives. So the second paragraph on 201. What comes out from all of this, this is in fact the entire life work of a person, to unify, to marry, to singularize, if that's such a word. Havaya, the expression that is revelation, and Elikim, the expression that is concealment. How do we do that? To know truthfully, to know earnestly, to know sincerely that Elikim does not conceal over Havaya. The Shem Elikim hu atmos adamsav k'mei Shem Havaya. That Elikim is an expression of the essence of God's of the infinite essence of God, just like Shem Havaya. Ve'etzem ene masad al etzem. So what does this mean to say? That our life's work is, in Kabbalistic language, is to unify Havaya and Elikim. In practical language is to say that we recognize that there is an infinite element to God's existence. There is an infinite expression in how God relates, and there is the finitude, the concealment, the limitations of this physical world. And we can operate in this world where there is God over there and the world over here, and operate in a reality in which we think that maybe some almost deist type of expression, where God maybe set the system up, but he's not involved, right? God is over in some different realm, is a different reality that is not pertinent to getting cut off in traffic, that is not relevant to getting a flat tire. But the true life's work is to see God within the flat tire and to see that there is a divine purpose and a divine mission, not just that it happened because God wanted it to, but in fact, that challenging experience allows us to have a richer and more robust relationship. And unifying that consciousness is the entire experience of what we're doing here. Learning how to incorporate more godliness into the way we conduct ourselves professionally, the way we orient our business life, the way we orient our family life, right? Bringing God into all of our material elements, all of our material life is the way that we harmonize, the way that we marry these two realities of Havaya and Elikim. And it's the way that we bring the infinite into the finite, which speaks to the purpose of what we're doing here, right? We are an infinite soul and a finite being, right? We are a divine expression of the infinite. The language that Kabbalah uses is chelik elikam mimal mamish, a literal piece of God, that is our soul, right? Which means that it contains all the elements of God's divinity, right? So it is infinite in some way. It has a capacity towards infinity. And yet it is inside of us in our physical body, right? That we're in a physical body, in a physical world, in a world that is defined by limitation and seems to have lots of rules and conventions on how it operates. And when we incorporate that consciousness into the way we operate, when we bring it into our experience, the forefront of our experience, that is marrying the two, right? That is bringing the infinite into the finite. We can have a relationship that is just two people together, or we can bring God into the relationship and it becomes a whole new level in what a capacity for a relationship is, right? In any type of interpersonal relationship, if it's dictated by a sense of survival of the fittest, right? Obviously, it's a flawed relationship. If it's dictated by the sense that we are two godly souls that are adjoining together, right? Then obviously it's a divine relationship. The Chassidim used to say that when two Jews sit together, so the two godly souls unify and become one, and there's an experience of real connection there, and that those two godly souls becoming one can tackle any challenge in this physical world. So when you sit with somebody and you share what's bothering you, you share what's challenging you, or you listen to somebody share what's challenging them, and you're there fully and sincerely and earnestly, and you give your soul to them, right? And you're present with the entirety of your being. So then you unify with that person, and together you're able to overcome challenges. As in the same vein that the Rebbe would stand every Sunday giving out dollars, right? And the whole premise every Sunday after services Sunday morning, the Rebbe would stand outside of his office giving dollars to anybody who come by. The line would last for like 8 hours. It was the Rebbe would stand the whole time just giving out dollars to everybody who came by. And the premise, the whole way it was conceived of, was the Rebbe would say a teaching from his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, who said that when two Jews meet, a third should benefit. Right? It's not enough that we're meeting and we're having a nice interaction, and that we're going to walk away more fulfilled, more enriched, right? But a third has to benefit as well. So that dollar was there to be given to tzedakah, to be given to charity, that somebody else should benefit as well. Right? And this is something that we can each carry into our own lives. We can each bring with us that the more we allow our soul to be present in each experience, not just in synagogue experiences, but in real day-to-day, real life experiences, right? When we're in the office, when we're at work, when we're in a cafe, when somebody cuts us off in traffic. It is those experiences where when we let our soul out, when we let our soul be present, then that's what we tap into the true mission of our existence, right? The true purpose of our existence. And that's all to say that the concealment of this world isn't really a concealment, right? That the concealment of this world doesn't cover over godliness in making it less attainable or less relatable or less accessible. Rather, the concealment is part of the purpose that allows us to relate to God even more. It frees us up. If there wasn't concealment, then we would say that you have to be in synagogue to have a relationship with God. Right? You'd have to be doing Jewish things. You'd have to be doing only mitzvahs or only study, and that would allow you a relationship with God. But the concealment makes it that in the office, when you're in traffic, the concealment facilitates that those can also be godly relationships. Those can also be godly experiences. The Avaya, continuing on page 202, the Avaya hu mahava kolanijah. Existence is sourced in the name of Havaya, right? It's sourced in expression, right? It's sourced in the infinite. And at the same time, we have the Elikim reality, which is that which gives form and limitation, but it doesn't conceal, it doesn't truly conceal. As we went through the whole back and forth, right? That whole conversation about the analogies and the analogy of giving analogies, right? And this the entire conversation we had. The concealment of Elikim allows the godly light to come down to lower places, right? It allows that in experiences which seem to be devoid of godliness, that seem to be devoid of any type of divinity, there we can find a relationship with God. And in fact, it facilitates our entire physical existence. That if it weren't for the concealment, everything would be divine, and divine is always orienting towards singularity, towards unity. So everything would be unified and it would just be all godly, right? It would be a totally spiritual realm that's totally divine and lacking any type of individuality, right? But Elikim, the concealment of Elikim, actually facilitates each one of us to be here in our own physical form as separate entities, and that there's a beauty in that, right? We can see that as fragmented, or we can see it as harmonious, right? When it's working properly, when it's elevated, it becomes harmonious, right? Harmony has to have at least two elements to it, right? It has to have, just like art, like color too, as well, right? There has to be multiple colors for there to be, it's the beauty we find in the contrast, in the juxtaposition, and the relationship between two. So it can be, we can perceive that as fragmentation, as separation, as distinction, but ultimately when it's elevated, it becomes harmonious. And that wherever a person is, he's able to tap into the shafa, the energy that comes from Havaya, that comes from the infinite. Meaning that though Elikim is there, though Elikim is a reality that facilitates, that creates, that allows for a physical world, that allows for limitations and for finitude, it doesn't mean that that defines the entirety of our experience. We're not bound by those limitations. That sort of sets the stage, but the system at play, what our soul allows us to tap into, is an infinity that is beyond the limitations of Elikim. And this requires for us to be connected, for us to be oriented toward the godly energy that is sustaining us. Not looking at the concealment, not looking at the limitations, not looking at that which is covering over, right? That which is hiding the godliness, not seeing the physical world as the be all and end all. But rather to see that the entire expanse of the cosmos, both spiritual and physical, is all there to facilitate, to create conduits for us to receive God's blessing, right? Which goes back to what we were saying, that obviously we don't jaywalk across the highway, across the freeway with a sense of like, well, God's in charge and I reject the limitations of this physical world, right? The limitations are very much there, but do we let it? Do we say this world is a physical world, so therefore, like, I'm bound by the limitations, the way they present, and there's no room to transcend to have any type of transcendent experience? Or do we say, yeah, this world's here and it's true, and if a person shouldn't stand in front of a bus, it's probably not a good idea, but at the same time, the existence of this world isn't something that gives us fear or causes us any type of fright to think that, like, the buses are out to get us, right? Like, God's in charge at the end of the day, and we orient towards that. We focus on that, towards the positive of God being in control, of God having a plan and a purpose for everything, and God being present within everything, that nothing is scary anymore. Nothing causes us any fear, right? Which is bar mizah elakama, the chashera inyan. Hainu hadvekas vayichud bolay al yidei nisayin arihu ba yidei za oid legilui ad elin yeser. And in fact, this is something that by himself a person could realize in some element, but that when a person through confronting, through enduring, or persevering through a challenging moment, is able to come out the other side with a richer relationship, a more enriched consciousness of God Almighty. This is the essence of where we're really able to develop and to grow our consciousness of the Almighty. And it's the tool that we have that allows us to appreciate a truly infinite God, and allows us to operate in a consciousness that is truly beyond the limitations of nature. And so we can look at these challenging moments and think to ourselves that, life's really hard and this really sucks. And there are, each one of us, I'm sure, has no shortage of challenges, and I would never, God forbid, want to belittle anybody's challenges and minimize them. because they are truly difficult. And you don't even need to say it. The Torah acknowledges the difficulty of challenges in this physical world, right? There is, in some sense, we all signed up for this, right? The Torah tells us, Al karchechat hanetzer, al karchechat achai. The Mishnah says in the Ethics of the Fathers that it is against our will that we were formed, and it is against our will that we live, and so too it is against our will that we die, right? Our soul had some in some choice in the matter, and was in some other way forced to come down into this physical world. And once it gets here, it's pretty happy to be here. It doesn't want to leave, right? Any transition experience is challenging, and the Torah acknowledges that. And each one of us, we all face challenges, and the challenges, we're not minimizing them, and we're not saying that they're not difficult. But what we're saying is that we have the opportunity to choose how we want to relate to it. We have the opportunity to choose how we conduct ourselves and what our consciousness is in enduring those difficult moments. There's an interesting Rabbi Taub who was here a couple of weeks ago. So he has a column in a magazine called the Ami, which is like a Jewish magazine, and he writes an advice column. I don't know, did he mention that he does that when he was, I don't know if anybody was here. It was a couple of weeks ago on Sunday. So they actually printed 2 volumes as books of different letters that he wrote, different responses that he gave. And then he stopped for a while. He started up recently again. And there was an interesting one where this lady wrote in. I'm probably misquoting a lot of it, but I think we'll get the gist of it anyways. This lady wrote to him saying, my parents are older, and they're demonstrating that they really like my sister more than me, and they invite my sister over and her family over all the time, and they've made it clear that they're going to give her everything in the will, and she's going to get their apartment, and she's going to get all their stuff, and they're totally ignoring me, and and it seems like they're really favoring her, and it's very difficult for me, and what should I do? And he says, which I thought was pretty wild, he says, the fact of the matter is that everything you say is probably correct. They probably like her more than you. They're probably going to give her everything. You're probably going to get the short end of the stick. It's an unfortunate reality. It's unjust. It's wrong, but it seems to be the truth of the matter. And at that point, the only thing that you have control of is how you're going to handle that situation. The only thing you have control of is the choice you're going to make, and how you want to perceive and how you want to relate to these people in that situation. You can operate with a lot of resentment and say, I don't want to have anything to do with you because you're singling me out and you like me less than my sister and all of these things. Or you can say, listen, these are finite people and they have their own flaws and their own limitations. And Baruch Hashem, God's taking care of me and I have what I need, and whatever. Those are the choices that they're making because they're limited individuals. And that's just how the cookie crumbles, So too with all the challenges that we face, that the Torah is not by any means, God forbid, minimizing them or belittling them. But we need to recognize that we can face challenging moments and challenging experiences and say, well, this is just too much, and this is clearly out of control, or this is just too much for me to handle, and or we can say this is clearly there's a bigger plan going on here. This speaks to God's whole vision for everything. And that there's an opportunity for me here to really do some growing and to do some real developing in my relationship with God. And that when we choose that outcome, not that it's always easy, but that we have that choice to choose that consciousness when we experience challenges, and that is really, that dials us in to why we're here in the first place. It connects us with our entire mission and our purpose. So it's a good way to close out this year, to close out 5783. And we will not have Kabbalah and coffee next week because it is Rosh Hashanah, but everybody should make sure to come to Shul for Rosh Hashanah, because Sunday is when we hear the shofar. We will hear the shofar on, I think it is scheduled for around noon. At the learner service is scheduled for 11. Which I'm leading with Mrs. Yocheved Saidoff, which will be downstairs in the seating room. That's from 10 to 11:30, and at 11, we will start the chauffeur service. If anybody wants that information, it's on the website, or I can send it to you. And then there's also a shofar on the Beltline at 7, I think, at 7 p.m. for anybody who wasn't able to make it during the day for whatever reason. And we'll also, if you happen to be going to Music Midtown, we'll be having chauffeur there as well.
Rabbi, you said that in order to merge Avaya and Elohim together.
Yeah.
That singularity, you need to come to a conscious state. And the conscious state occurs